Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, but I think it is still fair to say that this brewery are best known for the different kinds of New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs. Now, the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a style that I know these guys can do very well. It's one of their latest releases through Stigbergets here in Sweden, and it's also part of a series that I've been very impressed with when we've had them in the past, actually. So I'm quite curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. But this brewery is one of the most reviewed breweries here on Rampant Lion Reviews, and it's always cool to check out their new beers as well. So let's see what this one has in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, at Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in for the Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition these days. But for this review then, we are going to return to the wonderful Stigbergets Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Hypnotic. It comes in at 10% ABV, and this one is another New England hazy imperial triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA. So this is the third or fourth beer that we've had in what Stigbergets now seem to be calling the X series. We had the Bionic and the Chronic before, but yeah, these ones are, big triple New England IPAs. So yeah, this one kind of caught my eye when I saw it in the Systembolaget list. But incidentally, this beer was released as part of the Lokalt Småskaligt through Systembolaget for November of 2022. So yeah, let's crack on and see what this beer has in store for us. The Stigbergets Hypnotic 10% New England triple IPA. So yeah, let's do this. As always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Stigbergets Bryggeri before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there as well. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated. And of course, you can go into the channel homepage and use the geography-based tagging system. If you go in, use the search bar, you can search for beer based on your local county, city, state, whatever. Hopefully a few things will come up. We've done beers from all over the world so far, but we will be adding more. And you can, of course, check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Swedish playlist, along with many others. But let's go on to my brewery notes then to chat a little bit about Stigbergets Bryggeri before we taste the beer. So, Stigbergets Bryggeri, as I've mentioned to you before, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, and the company was founded by Nils Hultkrantz and Richard Simonsson. So the pair own two bars that share the one kitchen. This is Bar Kino and the Hagebjörn's Cafe, which can be found on Linegatan in the city, and these both opened back in about 2007. But the building itself is actually an independent cinema, and if you want to have a look at what it looks like, you can check out my Out and About video that I did back in about 2018, 2019, if memory serves me correctly. But originally, the idea that these guys had was to brew a few beers that they could sell in the bars, and this actually led to them kegging the beers and selling them to other pubs, and eventually they started bottling the beers as well, and that began in November of 2014. But the original beers they were making were mainly English and German styles, but they started to focus on the more American things, and this was what really helped them make their name. The original head brewer was Ole Andersson, who is a co-owner of OO Brewing. He was replaced in, I believe, April of 2017 by Barnaby Struve for a period of time, just very short, and he had previously been the vice president of Three Floyds in Münster in Indiana, quite close to Chicago over in the US. But they moved to Party Halarna, where they were brewing 5,000 litre batches at a time, and they also began working on some sour beers there as well. But it was at this point that they started selling their beers in the 440ml cans like this one, as opposed to the 330ml bottles. If you want to see those, go and check out some of my old reviews. But this allowed them to export their beer a lot more widely, and this really helped Stigbergets build up their profile across Europe. But these days, they have a brew team of Ollie Banks, who used to work for Beavertown in London, and also Lucas Munraid, who used to work for All In Brewing, one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating within the Gothenburg area. But recently, They moved to a new brewery in Ringen in summer of 2020, and they've been brewing some kind of lambic sort of wild ales and things there recently. We reviewed the first one of those, the Côtes du Ringen, very, very recently. But they're saying that at this brewery there might be the possibility for some swimming facilities, and they were talking in the article that I read about it being a kind of experience brewery. So we'll need to see what that is all about. But I would love to go up to Gothenburg once again and take a little look at what various different breweries are doing. There's a lot of craft beer stuff can be done up there. But they opened up a bar in Stockholm in April, I believe it was, of 2020, and they now have their own folköl shop in Gothenburg as well. For those of you watching outside of Sweden, folköl is anything that is 3.5% ABV and below. This can be sold in supermarkets in Sweden. Anything above that has to be sold through Systembolaget, which is the nationalised alcohol monopoly. It's kind of similar to, Alko in Finland, Vinmonopoly in Norway, and also Vinbuden in Iceland as well. But that's a basic thing. That's a Scandinavian thing, really. But these guys, like I said, they've become very well known for their kind of New England hazy IPAs over the years. When it comes to their classic beers that you need to try, Amazing Haze, you can't go wrong with that. And also the it's now called the New and Improved GBG Beer Week Beer, which was originally the GBG Beer Week Beer for 2016, if I remember the year correctly. But yeah, these guys were the ones who really launched the New England IPA in Sweden, along with OO Brewing the Narangi, which was produced as well by Ole Anderson, and I guess the New Sweden from Opigårds as well. But these guys, one of the Swedish brewers that you really need to check out. As of November 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced around 160 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. And they're always pumping out new things. But yeah, very, very solid brewery. One of the best known breweries here in Sweden. So yeah, it is definitely worth checking these guys out if you get the chance. So that's everything I can really tell you about Stigbergets Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about some of their other beers and my older reviews as well. But let's crack on then and have a little look at this beer itself. I'm really curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. So this looks pretty damn nice, I have to say. Quite different. We'll need to wipe the sweat off the can. It's been a little bit warm in here today, but you can see this one does look very, very nice, but quite different from the other beers that we've had in the Ick series before. Usually they've had black backgrounds, but they have had this kind of similar hop flower in the middle of the can. But like we said, this one is a 10% New England hazy imperial triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA. I believe this beer cost me like 65 Swedish kronor, so it was a wee bit more expensive, but it makes sense when it's 10%. So that is about €6.50, £6 sterling, somewhere in the region of $7 American. But yeah, it looks very nice. Plain silver top on the can there. And like I said, this was released as part of the Lokalt Småskaligt through Systembolaget for November of 2022. The hops in this beer, incidentally, are Nelson Sauvin, Citra and Motueka. So Nelson Sauvin and Motueka, of course, come from New Zealand. Nelson Sauvin's about 16% alpha acid. It's going to give you that big kind of gooseberry, white, green, grapey sort of flavour. Motueka is about 8% alpha acid. It gives you a lovely big kind of oily lime kind of thing. And then Citra we know very well. American hop, 14% alpha acid. Good little bit of lemon limey character, but it's mainly going to give you a bit of a stronger passion fruit and a kind of juicy mango. But I think we should get this beer out into the glass and see what we have. Really looking forward to this one. This was the beer I think I was most looking forward to out of the ones that I got for November 2022. So yeah, let's see what we have with this then. This should be pretty awesome. So I think that's enough for the moment to take a look at the beer, and we'll put the rest in a little bit later on. So yeah, we've probably got about maybe 2/3 of the beer into the glass just now. So before the head disappears, you can see that this beer has poured with, I would say, a half finger of a frothy, kind of perfect white head. That is fading away to be a thin foamy layer pretty quickly, and that's probably due to the alcohol content of the beer, but you can see it's leaving a nice ring around the edge of the glass there. So you can see some kind of medium and slightly bigger sized bubbles there. So it looks very, very nice. But yeah, in terms of the colour of this beer then, I'm just surprised at how quickly that head's faded away. It has just faded away to be a nice kind of wispy, thin layer there. But this one is very, very pale in terms of its colour. Kind of like a pineapple juice. I always like comparing these New England hazy IPAs to different types of fruit juices because their appearance just reminds me of that. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass with this one, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look really nice. But like I say, lovely, very kind of pale pineapple juice sort of colour to this beer. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EVC rating. 2, length of your wort ball is also going to play a role, because the longer you ball the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker coloured beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer too, but when it comes to New England IPAs, you don't often have to care about those two variables, to be honest with you. But yeah, it certainly looks the part. In terms of the haziness of this beer, it is pretty damn soupy and gloopy, but I'm not sure if it's the soupiest and gloopiest of New England triples that I've come across before. But yeah, the haziness in these beers usually depends on oak content, wheat content, and to a degree the yeast. It doesn't really matter where you are on the alcohol scale with these beers, because the whole thing can vary from brewery to brewery and beer to beer, of course. But in terms of what you'd expect appearance-wise from a New England IPA of any variety, there's nothing particularly surprising going on with this one. So yeah, let's have a wee look at the aroma of this beer then and see what we have. It certainly looks the part, that's for sure. Oh yeah, you can smell straight away with this one. This is going to be a monster. But the first impression I have of this beer, you can smell the big kind of lemon limey characters out of this one. The Nelson Sauvin and the Motueka are giving this beer a big sort of oily, lemon limey, gooseberry fruity character. That comes out right away in this beer as soon as you smell it. It almost has a little bit of a kind of candied, like we used to call the sweets Parma Violets back in Scotland. I don't think they've ever come over here to Sweden, but it just has this really kind of candied, fruity sort of note to it as well. But yeah, other than that, it's got a big kind of green component to it, this beer, absolutely big, kind of very bright floral characters to this one, and in the malt base, it comes across as very kind of creamy, and there's a good little bit of wheat in there as well, good little bit of wheaty bitiness. So aroma wise, this is a pretty interesting beer, quite quirky in a lot of ways. Yeah, I like this one. I really do like how the aroma of this goes together. This is going to be interesting to try, I'll tell you that straight away. But let's try and break the aroma down a wee bit more and just describe it for you more in depth. But as I always say, there are 6 elements you should look for in a New England IPA. Sort of farmhousey, yeasty character. You've also got the more kind of rye leaning grainy side of things. Those are a bit more common, of course, in American brewed New England IPAs, but you've got wheaty bitiness, oaty creaminess, barley malt bread, and also a good, sweetness and things. You can talk about these elements in the beers too, and quite often they will show you multiple, a number of these different things that I've just mentioned. But yeah, let's break the aroma of this one down a wee bit more. So backbone of the beer, absolutely, you can smell a little bit of that fresh white bready bread crust in this one. That's forming the backbone of the beer. On top of that, you're definitely getting, there's a little touch of that Jacob's cream cracker thing in this one, but not a lot. When it's a New England triple IPA, the crackery notes don't tend to come out quite as much. They tend to come out a wee bit more in the lower ABV ones, when you're getting more of the yeasty characteristics. Of course, with a higher ABV, you're more focused on the malt base and the malt content to give you the alcohol. But yeah, bread crust, yeah, good little bit of bread crust in this one. You've also got that, yeah, bit of fresh white bread crust. On top of that, you've got some, as I say, just big fluffy white bread in there from the barley malt, I'm guessing. So yeah, lovely bit of fluffy but still quite dense white bread. And then you can smell the wheat thickening out this whole beer, which is really interesting. So the wheat does give you a little bit of bitiness in the back of the nose, but mainly it's quite, mainly the wheat is acting as a smoothening agent in this one. So yeah, lovely big kind of smoothening agent in this beer from the wheat, but yeah, bitiness in the back, but there's a lot of oatiness in this one. And you can smell that this beer is pretty damn fresh. As I've always said, OT notes in New England IPAs are always an indicator of freshness. The creamier they are, the fresher the beer is, the drier they are, the older the beer is. But you get a lot of lovely big OT creaminess in the middle of this beer. You do get a little touch of the kind of drier and slightly sweeter OT notes to this one as well. But yeah, that sits on top of the wheat. In terms of sweetness in the malt base, this beer has... It's got quite a little bit of Werther's Original type quality to it, you know, that butter candy, butterscotchy type thing. There is a good little bit of that in this one, but I'm wondering how much of that is down to the booziness of the beer rather than actually being in the malt base, if that makes sense. You know, you'd quite often get these flavours and aromas from Golden Promise, for example. But yeah, this one really is interesting in that sense. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a good little bit of that kind of Parma Violet quality to this beer. So yeah, I do like how the malty base goes together in this one. So yeah, it really is quite interesting from that perspective. Good little bit of maltiness, good little bit of kind of, you know, straight up smoothness, sweetness in there as well. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is really quite interesting from that side of things. Let's look at the hoppy and fruity side of the aroma, though. We've been focusing on the malt base. On the hoppy side of things, the green component for me, there's a teeny little bit of earthiness there, but really this one is more floral and grassy, and it's actually quite a wet floral and grassy character that you get out of this beer. Now remember, there are 3 different types of hopping. Early edition hopping within the first hour of the wort boil, that gives you mainly bitterness. Late edition hopping within the last half hour of the wort boil, that gives you mainly a little bit of bitterness, but mainly flavour and aroma. Dry hopping is all about flavour and aroma. So yeah, when it comes to New England IPAs, they rely mainly on late edition, and kind of dry hopping, but there usually is a little bit of early edition hopping in there as well, particularly when it comes to the stronger ones, because it will just balance the beer out that wee bit more. But yeah, you've got a lovely little bit of you do have a little bit of that dank depth to this beer, but yeah, it's quite actually wet, and yeah, the floral and grassy character you get out of this one is more kind of wet rather than anything else. It's not madly bright, but you know, if you use early edition hop, it's going to be a lot deep and a lot deeper and a lot more dank kind of thing. So yeah, the way that the floral character goes together and the green component in this beer goes is really, really nice. So yeah, aroma wise, it's nice from that perspective. When it comes to the fruity side of the hops in this one, it's kind of what you'd expect. There's a lot of that kind of gooseberry note from the Nelson Sauvin. You can smell that right away in this one. But likewise, the Motueka is giving you the big kind of is giving you that big oily limey character. So yeah, I really like how all of that's going together in this beer as well. But yeah, aroma wise, it's quite nice. Yeah, aroma wise, this beer does go together very, very well. So yeah, lovely kind of white, green, grapey character coming out of the beer from the Nelson Sauvin, and then you've got the more kind of oily, slightly more potent limey character from the Motueka as well. But you're definitely getting some of the citra elements in there as well. The citra is going to give you that wee bit of kind of, as I say, it's going to give you that kind of, it gives you a little bit of the stronger passion fruit, but you're getting the nice juicy mango at the same time, and it's also giving you a little bit of a lemony note, like right on the front of the nose, so you can definitely get all of that out of this beer. Aroma wise, I have to say, it is pretty damn nice. So as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But yeah, I think this is going to be another very, very good addition to the so-called IC series from Stigbergets. I don't know if they've named it that officially, but yeah, these beers with the hop flowers on them all seem to be called like Hypnotic, Bionic, Chronic, and all of this. So yeah, I guess the IC series, as they were saying on Untappd when I had a wee look earlier. But yeah, let's have a taste of this one then and see what we have. This is the Hypnotic, a 10% New England triple imperial, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg. Let's get stuck in. Slanja, skål, and cheers. Oh yeah. I have to say, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. So this one for me, it reminds me actually of a beer that I had from Fierce, from Dice in Aberdeen a while back. They did a collaboration like triple IPA or something with Stigbergets Bryggeri from Gothenburg. And this beer, it really has that kind of candied Parma Violet type thing going on in the malt base with it. That's the first impression that I have in this one. But yeah, there's a good, it's nice and juicy and fruity. It is quite an oily, fruity New England IPA, this one. But you've also got the, you've got quite a bit going on in this. It's got a big kind of creamy malt base with a little bit of kind of candied character, which I'm guessing will be coming from the yeast. And yeah, you've got that nice big kind of floral green component as well. So yeah, this is a really quite interesting beer for me. It gets a thumbs up for sure. So yeah, way that this beer goes together, I think, is it's really quite interesting. But yeah, first impression of it, big, creamy, smooth, oily, fruity, and slightly candied New England IPA. But let's break this down and actually describe it a wee bit more kind of in depth for you, as we always like to do. So we'll start off in the middle third of your palate then. So backbone of the beer, as you would expect, you've got a little bit of that fresh white bread, sort of hedgehog type bread crust there. It almost just tastes as if there's a little bit of flour left on the crust of the bread, which is quite interesting. So definitely getting some of that out of this beer, which I have to say I do quite enjoy. So lovely little bit of a kind of fresh, floury type thing with this one. So yeah, on top of that, you're getting a little bit of the Jacob's cream cracker. This beer does give you that little bit of the kind of crackery dryness that you can quite often get from New England IPAs. Then above that, you're looking at the sort of white bready elements. So yeah, I do like how that goes together. So yeah, fresh white bread crisp, Jacob's cream cracker. Then you get that nice light but slightly fluffy layer of fresh white bread from the barley malt. Above that, you can feel the wheat, which is kind of densifying. It's giving the beer that little bit more density. It's kind of densifying the beer, so you can feel the wheat is quite smooth on top, like on top of that white bready layer. Then you can feel the even more dense oaty character to it. So when you go down the middle line of your tongue, you get this lovely, very dense and slightly creamy oaty character coming out of the beer. And then as you move further out from that, you start to get a little bit of the more kind of dry oaty character. So this beer, I think it is pretty damn fresh actually, but it's not at its, you can kind of tell from it, it's not at its absolute fresh, it's not at its absolute peak of freshness, I guess we could say. That's the phrase I'm looking for. So yeah, you can feel down the middle line of your tongue on top of the wheat, you get that nice creamy oaty character, and then as you move further out toward the edge of the palate, you get a little bit of a more you do get a little bit of the more oaty dryness out of this one, which I do quite like, I have to say that. It's quite nice to get that wee bit of balance in the oaty character of the beer. But above all of that, you've got this little circle in the middle of your palate where there is some really nice sweetness to the beer. And when it's a 10% triple IPA, you'd kind of expect that, to be honest. You do expect a wee bit of sweetness when you go above sort of 8.5%. With this style, you do want that. So let's just focus on that very middle part of your palate. So yeah, in the dead centre of your tongue with this beer, there is a wee bit, there's quite a lot of this kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy flavour. And as you move out from the dead centre of your palate across the top of that oaty layer that we've talked about, you start to get a little bit more of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing to this one. But you can really feel within, it's a bit hard to pick out whether it's within the kind of brown sugary or there's original layer, or whether it's within the kind of oaty layer that the beer has. You do get a lot of this kind of Parma Violet, slightly candied type character to the beer. So yeah, I think the way that that goes together is quite interesting. I really don't know how to describe that. It's almost a little bit sherbety. Trying to describe that for a Swedish palate, I think, is quite difficult. But to me, it really reminds me of these Parma Violet sweets that we had back home in Scotland. And sherbet is probably a good way to kind of describe it as well. Maybe it's actually not a million miles away from the Bilar sweets that you get here in Sweden, the little car things. It's kind of like that. You have this little bit of an almost Bilar type flavour mixing in with the oats and the kind of sweeter side of this beer in the middle of the palate. So that's quite interesting as well. But that's the middle third of your palate described. Let's go on to the back third of the palate then, and it's quite similar. So the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you get a little bit of that bready build up in there. The base of the beer, like I said, it's a little bit more of a kind of grainy bread crust. You have a little bit of Jacob's cream cracker in there, and you also have you do have a little bit of an almost kind of like brown bready, wholemeal bread type layer. Then you get the more white bready layer that we talked about earlier, and above that you get the wheat. So again, a very layered kind of thing going on in the back third of the palate, but the wheat that sits in there has a wee touch of dryness and spiciness to it. So yeah, I quite like how that goes together, that's for sure. And then above all of that, you start to get the more kind of yeasty, farmhousey type character coming out of the beer. So there is just a little bit above all that kind of wheaty layer that I was talking about. You get that more airy white bread. It's almost got a little touch of honeycomb and a little bit of wood to it. It's kind of interesting to see how that transpires, but you can certainly feel that on the back third of the palate, the flavour is definitely taller. Then as you come further forward, it just condenses down and squashes together a wee bit more. But yeah, I think that covers the malty and yeasty side of this beer. Let's look at the green component and the hoppy and fruity side of things then. So, back corners of the palate, there's definitely a little bit of earthiness in there. And as you move further forward, it gets a wee bit more herbal, and then you start to get this more oily, kind of floral type note to the beer. So I really do like how that goes together in this one. Yeah, so a nice big kind of oily floral character coming out of the beer, and then round the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and more grassy, but still quite oily. The green component in this beer really is pretty damn oily, and it does feel like it's got a wee bit of dankness to it in a way, but not too much. So that tells me there's a little bit of early addition hop in here, but you're still getting a lot of late addition and dry hopping with this beer for sure. So yeah, that's interesting too, but you do expect when you go higher up in the alcohol scales, even with the New Englands, you do expect that little bit more bitterness out of these to kind of balance the beer out. But I don't think we need to say any more about the green component of this one. Let's focus on the front third of the palate and the sort of fruitiness of the beer. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a nice little bit of bready build up there, and the base of that front third of your palate is definitely more kind of oaty and smooth, I would say. It's like a kind of slightly creamy oaty type note. So yeah, more smooth white bready note and a little bit of an oily, a kind of oaty character there. So above that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. And yeah, like I say, I do like how that kind of goes together in this one. You've got a really interesting blend of hops in this beer: the Citra, the Motueka, and the Nelson Sauvin. Right enough. So at the back of that front third of your palate, you can feel the slightly stronger grapefruit, but I don't know if I'd say it was more of a passion fruit. You can feel the Citra there. The back half of that front third of your palate is more about the citrus. So you get a wee touch of the grapefruit, but quite a strong pungent passion fruit, juicy mango, and as you reach the kind of middle of that, kind of front third of your palate, you do start to get, you get a little touch of apricot and papaya and stuff in the base. You get a bit more dry fruity character the further into the aftertaste you go, but you start to get that wee bit of pineapple. And then as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, you get the more kind of limey notes from the Motueka. And the more that I drink this beer, you can taste that you can feel that there's a kind of oily gooseberry white grapey base to it. That's the Nelson Sauvin. So you've got that oily white grapey base and then a more limey character on top of that. So yeah, it's really interesting. You can certainly pick out all three of the hops in this beer and they work together really quite well. So yeah, this has been a really interesting one to try, I have to say. But yeah, passion fruit, mango, a little bit of apricot and pineapple there. Underneath all of that, underneath all the fruity characters, you've got that gooseberry, white green grapey thing from the Nelson Sauvin. Then at the front, at the very front, in that front half of the front third of your palate, it's more about the oily, limey character from the Motueka. Maybe that little touch of a lemony note as well, because the Citra is going to amplify what the Motueka is doing. Citra and Motueka, of course, is a bit of a classic blend when it comes to IPAs of any description. But like I say, really interesting beer, this one, and again, very nicely done, but it really does have this lemon sherbety, Parma violet, candied sort of vibe to it, this one. So quite interesting from that perspective. But I think that's everything we need to say about the flavour of this beer. In terms of the mouthfeel, for me, this is kind of bottom end to full bodied, I think that's fair to say. The carbonation is very smooth. It's really got quite a creamy character to it, this one, which I really quite enjoy. So lovely kind of creamy character to this beer, absolutely. Yeah, kind of creamy but very, very smooth at the same time. In terms of IBUs, this one isn't too bitter. I think this is maybe about 40, 50 IBUs at a push. You know, you do expect from a 10% triple that it will have a wee bit more bitterness. This one doesn't go too far in that sense. Yeah, this one doesn't go too far in that when it comes to that side of things. But yeah, like I say, I think it works pretty damn well actually. Yeah, so maybe about 40-50 IBUs with this beer. The malt base is very smooth. You've got a little bit of, you know, more bready character, but you've got the big kind of smooth creaminess in there, a little touch of sweetness, and that kind of candied thing that I was talking about as well. The green component balances out the beer a little bit, gives you, yeah, the further you go into the aftertaste with this beer, the bitterness certainly builds up. It's, you know, you get a wee bit more IBU out of this beer, 40 or 50 IBUs, like I said, and you've got that lovely balance in the fruit, a slightly tropical note on top, but then the more oily gooseberry and more kind of citrusy character just to balance it out. But I really like how this one goes together. This is quite different from what I remember from the other beers, you know, the Bionic and Chronic that we've had in the Ick series. This one's definitely a bit more candied and, you know, gives you that more Parma violet-y, lemon sherbety type thing, but it's still a really, really solid New England triple, so it gets a big thumbs up from me. I don't think we need to say anything more about this one. Really interesting beer, and I'm glad we got the chance to review this, and I can feel the alcohol in this one going to my head a little bit, so yeah, I'm going to go away and sip on the rest of this beer. But yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Stigbergets as well. And yeah, we will no doubt return with more reviews from them in the near future. But this one was the Hypnotic, a 10% New England hazy Imperial Triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg, Gothenburg here in Sweden. Until the next time, stand just now, check out my social media, check out Stigbergets' social media, and you will see more reviews very, very soon. Cheers.